Good evening. I am Kathy Dean, Program Chair for the League of Women Voters, Grand Traverse Area. I would like to welcome you to our October program featuring a presentation by Hans van Summeren, Director of the Great Lakes Water Studies Institute, right here at Northwestern Michigan College. But before Hans gets going on his presentation, I'd like to put in a little plug for the League of Women Voters. We are a nonpartisan political organization. We don't support or oppose any political party or candidate. We encourage informed and active participation in government. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influence public policy through education and advocacy. We have a dynamic and vibrant local membership, and we welcome new members. For those of you that are interested, please see our pamphlets on the back table. It looks like we have pretty much a league organization right here in Scholars Hall. Hans' presentation this evening is going to be a prelude to the October Freshwater Summit being held on November 1st at the Hagerty Center. Tonight, he's going to delve into relevant topics in the Great Lakes and many of the world's watersheds by shedding light on the relationship between environmental sustainability, economic opportunity, and social value. Hans has extensive research and field experience across the Great Lakes, U.S. coastal oceans, and the Alaskan Arctic, including a diverse background across many engineering disciplines, with an emphasis on hydrographic surveying, environmental monitoring, coastal processes, and underwater operations. Very exciting, he has pioneered the co-development of the nation's first associate's degree in freshwater studies while at NMC, including the integration of advanced hydrographic survey hardware and software at the entry technician level. Hans holds an MSc and BSc in Naval Architecture and Marine Engineering from the University of Michigan. He is the recipient of the Excellence in Staff Service Award from the University of Michigan's College of Engineering and the Key Partner Award at Michigan State University Extension. He is the first robotics competition judge right here in Traverse City, and he is a current board member of the Grand Traverse County Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, Grand Traverse County Economic Development Corporation, and the Michigan Sea Grant Advisory Committee. Hans is the author of several select reports and publications about the Sleepy Bear Dunes National Lakeshore, an area near and dear to many of our hearts, as well as a presenter for such well-known television programs as the Discovery Channel, the History Channel, and the National Geographic TV. Please join me in giving Hans a warm welcome.
Right. Thanks, Kathy. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's fun to be here, and it's fun to talk about what we're going to explore today. A lot of what Kathy introduced me with, I'm going to have examples here, and probably the best focus for everyone to understand about what we do at the college and what we do in water in this region is really on this slide. I'm very proud of what's up there. When you think of NMC and you think about what we do in water and you think about what's happened over the years, we see an enormous amount of opportunity for people of all ages, from our degree platforms, students coming in, students who are still in high school, students who have master's degrees in engineering coming back and getting a freshwater studies degree. A very diverse set of classroom experiences. I'll just go through it. It starts out with the Great Lakes Water Studies Institute. In terms of my perspective, that started about 10 years ago. We're hitting our 10-year anniversary. The college, long before I was ever involved with any of this, knew how important it was to be a leader in freshwater conversations. Developing the Great Lakes campus and really making that a mainstay for the operations was a signature event. It's a beautiful campus. It's a great place for students to learn. It's a lot of opportunity. And when we have outside visitors come in from other universities, from other organizations, they come in there and they're floored. They look down, they look up. They ask me, was the building built a year ago? They ask, you have windows that are shaped like portholes, and we have windows that are square. You have wood trim. We have no trim. We have all these things that I pass by and I don't notice every single day. Yet people come in and come from other universities, and these are universities, not necessarily community colleges. They're just blown away. And then I take them to the other parts of our campus, and I show them what we have in other programming. And their jaws drop. They look up, they look down. They say, holy and they are very impressed. And that to me says a lot. I'm very proud to work here, and I'm very proud of what we've been able to do in the last 5 years, leading right into freshwater studies. And my partner and colleague at the Institute, Constanza Hazelwood, and I both started about 5 years ago. And one of the first things we did was implement a strategy to create an education degree, freshwater studies. College already had a lot of great courses here. We had a lot of opportunity to teach students on science, water-related science, the right kinds of baseline information that any student would need to pursue career fields in these areas. And then we filled in the gaps. What did we need to also engage our students? One of the first things that we created was an introduction class that really was a broad perspective on what goes on in freshwater and science and water research and water management and policy and sustainability and agriculture and on and on and on. Jim Olson in the audience, he comes and talks to our class specifically about water policy, the Great Lakes Compact, water issues affecting use and ownership and all these things. They're hearing from experts who are extremely well known. I was running late today getting here. We had Steve Largent and Garrett Coggin from Grand Traverse Conservation District talking about the revitalization of the Boardman River and the Michigan Agriculture Environmental Awareness Program that is run to help farmers be environmentally sustainable in protecting our natural resources and being smarter about management of their farmlands and their cattle. Great for our students. Our students are exploring watersheds around the world. We have watersheds ranging from the Rio Grande to the Nile to the Ganges to the Murray-Darling. There's a few others, Amazon. But they're all looking at issues that are affecting watersheds. It's easy to look out our windows and see the bay and think everything's good. But when you start exploring other watersheds and you see some of the issues that they're facing, it puts a new perspective on what we have. I'd say in the last few years, we've gotten a little more well known for our ability to do mapping underwater, to use hydrographic technology to map the bottomlands of Grand Traverse Bay. This started by a company, the sales rep who vacationed here, his mother-in-law lived here, came by and he said, I see you have a water studies program, you have a maritime program, have you ever done this? No, I had some background in it, but we've never done it here. Would you like to? Let me give you a piece of equipment. And so that year we started, and I'll show some slides later on, but we started mapping the bay. And we've actually gotten so, I'll say, good at it. We've had students enroll in the program, graduate, and get jobs in it before we even were actually doing official training. So that led into an opportunity in marine technology. Marine technology is the training of individuals. That's a new degree platform to work in any marine-related technician field, using the equipment, running the instrumentation, calibration. And we have a lot of PhDs who develop these pieces of equipment or really advanced education platforms or people to develop these systems, but we've often forgot about the people who then have to go run them. And so there's a real need, there's a real void in the labor market for people who can run these systems. Now I'm really excited that we train our students from the baseline up. How do you install it? How do you deploy it? How do you calibrate it? The worst thing I would want to do if I was an employer, send out my employees, is go take this $1 million piece of equipment and then collect a bunch of garbage today because you didn't calibrate it right or you didn't do this right. So we really focus on those fundamentals, and it's paid off. Employers have come back, and I've met people, and you have my first graduate. And he said, well, who's that? And I'll say, well, David Beers. And he said, wow, clone him 3 times. He's perfect. And so what a better endorsement for that. Research. As a community college, you don't often hear about research. We do a lot of research. Right now in our lab, we're doing research on vertical agriculture. Constanza has been very active with partners in both Costa Rica as well as in Traverse City, looking at new advances in vertical agriculture. Vertical agriculture is an opportunity both to consume less water in the production of food as well as produce food in areas that are like outside today. We won't be growing lettuce in the weather today, but you can inside our lab right now. And she has students involved with that. We have partnerships that are bringing people back and forth overseas. We have students who are finding jobs because of some of the skills that they're getting, jobs that keep them in Traverse City. We hear that more often than not. How do I get a job in Traverse City? Well, sometimes you have to create that job, and it's really important for our students to understand how they can do that. Our Maritime Academy has been here over 40 years. This December, we expect the final approval from the Higher Learning Commission to deliver the first community college baccalaureate degree, the first community college to give a bachelor's degree in Michigan. That's pretty incredible, I think. And I think it's only an opportunity for students to come here for another avenue of water-related training. Our industry partnerships, I mentioned the company that gave us the sonar. Well, that's just one of them. And they continue to give us equipment. They continue to train our students to bring their people here so we know how to use their equipment because they know it's an investment in their own company. The more they train our students on how to use their equipment and give it to us for our academic training, the more those people, when they get out in the workforce, are going to be able to suggest to their employers, you should buy this piece of equipment. Not only do I know how to use it, but it always worked really well. University collaborations. There's a few of the universities that are up there that we work with, but certainly research partnerships. We have proposals out with Central, with Grand Valley, with Western. We're working with the University of Michigan on another one. We have had several with Michigan State. Ferris, we're working on degree partnerships in advanced survey engineering. Western, hopefully next fall, will be delivering the first bachelor's cohort in freshwater science and sustainability at the University Center, 100% delivered in Traverse City, a bachelor's of science in water that directly builds on our freshwater studies degree. It's not official yet. They won't ever say that they had the conversation with us yet, but that's only because they're waiting for those final authority and approvals from the Higher Learning Commission. But what an opportunity. Students from all of our local schools can get a degree that has value, that's very rigorous, that is applicable to many of the jobs that aren't even described yet in terms of the workforce. Earth University is our major partner in Costa Rica. If you've not heard of Earth University, maybe you've had their bananas before. They have some amazing bananas they grow. They're sold typically at Whole Foods, but they are a whole agroeconomy, business-focused, entrepreneurial, emphasized farming education. Students from 40-some different countries from around the world come there to learn the basics in farming, to learn the basics in business, how to run a business, how to make more profit with what you have by less waste or using your waste to produce energy. And I'll give some examples of that. But what's exciting is a lot of this we're talking about in the examples I'm going to show, these are our students' projects. These are what our students have been able to do. These are partnerships that we've been able to develop that have really strengthened what we do. So I throw up liquid assets at the beginning, looking at water and water as value. Certainly water as it's owned in the West versus as it's owned here or used here is quite different. And so I thought that was a good image. And Jim, actually, it always made me think of you when I see an image like that in terms of water wars and as we go out west. But if you look at where water use is, this is freshwater use, and the statistics are, you find different numbers on the web. So these are approximate values, but 41% of our freshwater use is for thermoelectric plants, cooling water, things like that. A majority of that water is put back into the system. It's not consumed completely. About 80%, I think, is put back. But a big draw from our water resources is for thermoelectric. Irrigation is right behind, if not in front of, and it depends on the statistics you use. But the idea that irrigation is essentially 2/5 or 40% of all the water we use in the U.S., we got to start thinking of ways that we can be better at using that water. Those are big numbers. The publicly supplied users, industrial use, even aquaculture is starting to show up. A number that I never saw in these statistics when I look farther back. The idea that we're using water in aquaculture uses, which is a good way to start investigating new opportunities. Livestock and mining, about 1% of our water use each, freshwater use, and then probably about 1% in losses. We leak that much water through our aging infrastructure. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but about 1% of all the water we withdraw gets put right back into the ground through leaks. So advances in irrigation. You know, a lot of countries still rely only on flood irrigation. Flood irrigation is the simplest in some of the aspects in terms of they don't have the infrastructure to support it, but it's an extremely wasteful way to use water. Most of that water evaporates. The thing is, the two examples I've shown there with the furrow flooding, those are domestic examples. That's still widely used. Sprinkling, obviously, is a better alternative. It's a little more targeted, but a lot of that has still gone back to the atmosphere and not to the plants where it's needed. If we just focus on technology involving drip irrigation, it's a 60 to 80% reduction in water use for agriculture. So that 40% can be dramatically reduced. So where our burdens on our aquifers and other resources that we draw water from are not so burdened. And maybe we're better at relieving drought-stricken areas because of implementation of certain technology. Technology like this isn't as expensive as it used to be. People are using it in their homes. It's something that I think will really help, and we're getting better at using technology. We can monitor water by the drop. You can monitor leaks in pipes by the drop now. Something that people often didn't know if their toilet was running, if they had a toilet in a part of the house that continually didn't seal and would run, and when you get a water bill and it was really high, they didn't even realize that toilet was running. We should be able to, the water company, the municipality should be able to tell people, hey, your water use spiked this last month. It's costing you money, it's costing them money. No one gains from that. We need to understand how to use those kind of technologies better. So I think irrigation is where we're going to see a lot of advances, both domestically and abroad. I use Singapore as an example. Singapore is a unique situation in that previously, you know, the majority of their water, well, 40% of their water was imported. And the Malays, where they got their water, you don't want to rely on another country to provide the majority of your drinking water, or nearly 50% of it. So they were getting what I'll call a pretty good deal, a penny per 1,000 gallons of raw water. But they knew they didn't want to have to rely on that because that could be cut off at any one time. And if you want to stop a growth cycle in a country, you just stop their water. And we see this in other parts of the world. So they started creating a better infrastructure. They started creating a whole catchment basin in their entire country to recapture the water that fell from the sky, to repurpose that water. They looked at recycling water, reuse of water, things that are going to happen globally for us to be better at using our water resources, and domestically. They came up with a new way to market reused water. They first started recapturing water, and they had an issue with the branding. And I don't know if it was ever called reused water, but if you're done mowing your lawn or whatever you're doing and you're all sweaty and you can have a glass of reused water or Renew water, I think I'll take a glass of Renew water. And Renew water represents a big part of their plan and their ways of marketing water to the community, so people buy into what they're trying to do. So Singapore has really, I'll say, taken a lot of the challenges that they're faced with and really come up with some pretty advanced solutions. It took a lot of money. It wasn't cheap to do any of those things, but they knew that if they didn't spend the money now, the problem was only going to get worse. And I'm going to show vertical agriculture. Hopefully this works.
Early morning at Sky Greens, and Farmer Jack Ng is checking on his crops. This is Singapore's farm of the future. Instead of taking up large tracts of land, these plants will grow to maturity in troughs like this, stacked on aluminum towers. It's called vertical farming. Sky Greens has patented this system of rotating vertical racks.
Singapore is land-scarce country, so if we want to produce our own food, we must go high productivity.
At the heart of this system is a water wheel. And ancient idea adapted to modern use. Here, it is powering the pulleys that move the racks of plants. The farm says the water wheel pump for one tower only needs the amount of energy it would take to power a light bulb. Instead of watering from above, the troughs of plants slowly rotate up and around the towers, eventually passing through a base of circulating water.
So for the plant, they don't overstress under the hot sun. At the same time, they can get nutrients and the water equally.
The water is then recycled back and then filtered before returning to the plants. This method requires far less water than traditional farming. The farm is also experimenting with water from its own ponds, where fish help keep the water nutrient-rich.
Sky Greens has just over 100 of these towers in operation, with a goal of producing over 2,000 by 2014.
So, we think about innovation in agriculture, and what a great example. And this is very similar to what Constanza is working on. This is what Cherry Capital Foods is working on. This is what hydroponic TLC or what the people around here are trying to do it. We have these dark months where it's difficult to grow some certain crops, if any, and why not start investigating this? This has application in the humid tropics. This has application in the Arctic. This has application in big cities where farmland is non-existent, yet dilapidated or run-down buildings are prevalent. So the idea of recapturing a brownfield building and layering it to grow food using LED lights, blue, red, even fluorescent lighting, doing it inexpensively, using less water, growing fresh fruit, fresh lettuces for people to use year-round, even pulling out your drawer in your kitchen where you're growing your own family's lettuce for the week. That's how they see these things moving forward. In a lot of communities, this is going to be the only option for access to fresh food, because importing and exporting food is a virtual water source, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. If you're already water starved and you start pushing food that you're creating for your own populace away, you're moving your water out of your own country. So things like this are not the mainstay, but they're starting to come more into focus. And I look at Constanza and what she's got going in the upper left. That's in our fume hood in the lab, and it has a constant source of nutrient-rich water just going through the root tips. So the plant is in a medium, a sphagnum moss, or even styrofoam can be used if you don't have a lot of resources. But they're growing Bibb lettuce, and that lettuce is 3 or 4 weeks old. But other people are looking at it in these giant houses where blue and red LED light is being used. LED lights are becoming less expensive. They don't use a lot of energy. And the blue and red wavelengths are areas where people have found that the plants respond the best. The problem is, and then here's a tower. This is another idea of a food tower, basically a food condominium where your lettuce is grown, your salad, your whatever crop it is. The problem is nature still does a better job. Natural sunlight still does a better job. The research is really in how do you provide the plant with the right kinds of stressors to allow it to evolve the way we like it to look, taste, and feel. The nutrient content can also change. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but that work is starting, and I think it's really important. And it's exciting that our students are getting involved in that. They're measuring the nutrient contents. They're learning about the atmospheric conditions inside that incubator, getting an idea how things affect growth stages. But in the end, it all reduces the water consumption and the opportunity to use that water differently than they otherwise would have been able to. Virtual water trade. If you look at products and the amount of water, the graph represents liters of water per liter of product or kilogram of product. So as we go up the pyramid, as it gets bigger, beef is absolutely at the top. And then we get down, and I think we have dried fruit. In some ways it's prepared, and then pork, and it works its way down, poultry, till we get down to our vegetables and potatoes and things like that at the bottom. But if we start thinking about how much water it takes to produce a pound of beef or a pound of chicken, We got to start maybe thinking about those kind of trade-offs, depending on what your water situation is and where you live and how you feel about it. But these numbers are real. It takes a lot of water to grow a cow. It just does. I mentioned Earth University and what our students do. Every spring, Constanza takes a team of students down there every early summer, and they are immersed in the culture of the campus, of the country, of the communities. They conduct water research. They have fun. They dive into the rivers and things like that. But they really focus in on some of the practices that are implemented in Costa Rica. It's one example. There are many of them out there. Costa Rica uses energy. 93% comes from some form of renewable energy source, primarily hydroelectric, and then the wind is the major second. But on their campus, they also recover all of the animal waste, the human waste, and the agriculture waste, and they put it in what's called a biodigester. And that biodigester allows those products to decompose and at the same time create methane gas, just like we see in our landfills. They take that methane gas, they run it through a generator, and they provide the power for their campus. The water that then leaches out of that decomposition is fed through different nutrient baths that certain plants with larger uptakes of nutrients are staged at the early stages. And then there's settling ponds where they grow certain lettuces on the surface of those settling ponds that takes up more of the nutrients. And then that goes on. And that's about 3 settling ponds or 4 settling ponds. We went down and saw this when I was there a few years ago. There's caiman running around in there, so you can't stick your hand in the water. But they harvest that lettuce and they feed it back to the cows and the pigs that created the waste that caused the need for doing it. So by the end of going through all these processes, you've gotten water that is a lot cleaner than it was. Most of the nutrients have been removed, and that water is then refed back to the cows and the pigs. So it's clean enough for the animals to reuse it. You create a continuous cycle. You've provided power for your community, for your school. You really start to see how you can add value to agriculture. You may not be able to do all of that, but you could do pieces of it. You could implement it. There's strategies to help farmers be better farmers. And they're applying them there. And these are communities that are historically very poor. These students come from areas where there isn't a lot of opportunity to be real innovative. And so they come and they learn these processes at Earth. And they go back, and when I was there, I met a student from Haiti, Cien. And I said, what are you going to do when you graduate? He said, well, I'm going to go back, and I'm going to start a community, a commune of the farmers around me, and I'm going to grow this product, and they're going to grow that. I'm going to market the combination of these two products, and I'm going to manage everything. And I said, you're going to get that in a 4-year degree? I've never heard of that. He said, oh, yeah. I said, you're confident? Absolutely. You could hear it. You could tell. He was extremely confident. He knew he was getting the right education. And that's when we knew we had a right partner. I mean, they do some amazing things. Our students come back transformed when they visit that place. They're sending interns here. They have a student who's working at Black Star Farms right now. And Lee Lutz has been working with him, and he wants to go down there and show him some of our ways of distilling fruits to create spirits. That's something that Earth hasn't done. So that maybe there'll be a banana liqueur or something coming out of this. But why not have a transfer of opportunity? It's economic value. It's environmentally conscious in terms of using your product to its fullest extent. And it's providing an education platform. Now, they don't necessarily prefer our winters, but that's another story. The students we spent, or that went down this year, 3 women who are completing our degree, and they're in the top, and they're talking to one of the students who's from Kenya, and they really got along with these Kenyan students there, and they were actually crowned the queens of Kenya after they left. But they really, these women gave a perception that they hadn't thought existed in the U.S. In terms of how they felt things could be done. So a very eye-opening experience for the Kenyans, and certainly for our students as well. All their work down there is done in Spanish, too. So we've embedded language. Constanza's done an amazing job at embedding language into the skills and competencies. So they're learning Spanish for science, which isn't taught in typical Spanish courses. Luis Miguel, who's down in the lower picture here with Constanza, he's working at Black Star Farms, and he absolutely loves it. The students in the lower right are building a biodigester for a farmer. It's about $150 of plastic bags and 5-gallon buckets. It takes about a day to put it together, maybe a little less. It takes about 4 days to dig the hole in their clay soil. Farmer digs the hole, the students come in, they use it as a lab feed, they build that for them. That family, which is this picture with all the students on the left, they're getting an hour to 2 hours of cooking gas every day. Cooking gas that now allows them not to burn punky wood, so kids don't have asthma issues or lung issues growing up in a house that's full of smoke. They have clean burning gas, so it's a real opportunity for them. That man, he was so overwhelmed that these students came 4,000 miles to build that for him, and that he would make it last forever. It already lasts probably 10 years, and it's just a giant garbage bag. It's a little thicker, but it doesn't take much to make it happen, and everyone has cows or pigs or some sort of animal that can contribute to it. So it's really a great learning experience, and it can scale. The other thing is that you can make these much, much bigger. You can produce a lot of methane this way. It doesn't work everywhere, but it has application. So when we look at changing gears quite a bit, but we start looking at water and its value, its price. We talk about this in class, and students don't even know how much they pay. A couple did, actually. I give credit. A couple knew exactly how much they paid for water. But I said, well, who's on a well? How much do you pay? Well, we don't pay anything. Okay. But we pay for cleaning of the water. We have a sewer bill that comes every 3 months. And so I put some examples down there, a cell phone. People, I know how much I pay for the cell phone. I can tell you how much the dish costs, charter internet, sewer fees, but I really don't get a handle on water. So we've always priced water how to clean it, not how to actually use it in the first place when it is clean. We use water that is cleaned at a plant in our toilets, in our tap, in our shower, washing our car, even watering our garden if we use that water for that. It's things like that are where we got to evolve as well, because we can't use water the same way, or at least there's a lot of opportunity not to use it the same way. And if you look at pricing, even in the U.S., like in New York, compared to, I put Columbia on there. I found this because it had Columbia and Constanza, and I thought that might mean something to her. But you look at how other countries are pricing water, it's significantly more than we have in the U.S. Even in China, Beijing, their water prices are not that much at all. So they're looking at 4 or 5 yuan per cubic meter. That's 16 cents, and a cubic meter is 265 gallons. They're not paying a lot, even though they're consuming a lot of water. So the water pricing index is something that we really need to look at. And water pricing is relatively inelastic in terms of raising prices and then the corresponding drop in demand. You can drop or increase water, they say 10%, and you see a corresponding decrease in use of 5 to 7%. So it's not a one-to-one. So we haven't hit a threshold where people even understand that the price of the water is really of any importance to them. Pittsburgh versus Phoenix. I use this with the students. The cost of water in Pittsburgh is something like, let's say, $10 per unit. And in Phoenix, it's $3. Phoenix doesn't have as much water as Pittsburgh has access to, but Pittsburgh's cold. Pittsburgh has infrastructure that's really old. Pittsburgh has freezing temperatures. Arizona, most of these places don't, or Phoenix doesn't have what they do. So they can use material that's not buried as deep, that's less expensive to put in, lasts longer in terms of some of the plastics they can use, and the infrastructure is much newer. So we're paying for the cost of the infrastructure in terms of how we price the value of the water. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second, but it leads you to think about where can we be smarter, and there's a lot of companies out there that are looking at this from the innovative side. Certainly the energy efficiency. We use pumps to push water for all applications, and pump efficiencies are some of the biggest ways of increasing efficiency in a company, for instance, or in a municipality. The better technology for pumps can really save a lot, both on the amount of energy used, which correspondingly is the amount of water used, because it takes water to produce energy. The U.S. market, there's a lot of people trying to do some good stuff, and I was part of some conversations in the last few years at a group called the Water Innovations Alliance, and the people that would come talk about the different types of technology they were trying to create, it was really interesting that it was always roadblocks. If I couldn't get past this hurdle, I couldn't get the right investor to give me the money. There were plenty of examples of things that had worked, and a lot of them came out of military applications, because the military knows their troops can only go so far as they have water resources to sustain them. So they develop smart filtering, they develop smart use techniques. But a lot of other people, there's a lot of technology dying on the vine. It takes too long, people don't get investments in there. There's a lot of stuff out there that hopefully will make it to market, because there's a lot of opportunity. The water reuse, water treatment, even just desalination prices have plummeted significantly. A lot of countries are going to have to rely on desalination. A lot of countries that aren't in oil-rich parts of the world, where they have a lot of energy to drive those energy-intensive desalination plants, they're going to have to be smart about how they develop it. But there's a lot of people who want to try and make it better. And I just see there's a lot of opportunity to go from what we have as a traditional scenario in the upper right to what we could use with different treatment technology coming down the road. So I mentioned energy consumption and just pushing water around. So I've always thought this was pretty incredible that 20% of the electric grid in California goes to moving water, just moving water from the north to the south. 3 times or more than the nation as a whole. The Chinese are doing it. And I put these 2 examples. Those are pictures from California on one side and China on the other. They don't look any different. One is the South-North Water Transfer Project. The other is the California North-South Transfer of water resources. So they're investing a lot of money to take water from the Yellow River and push it north, where they need it for the development of their coal industry. The South-North Water Transfer Project is, I just looked at the number, 45 billion cubic meters of water per year. In U.S. gallons, that's the equivalent of Lake Erie every 11 years, going from the south to the north. Lake Michigan every 110 years. Lake Superior every 300 years. But it puts a perspective that we're draining a Great Lake in 11 years is what they're doing in the equivalent of pushing water to the north. The amount of energy it would take to do that, it's pretty incredible. But they're spending the money to do it. In terms of gross domestic product, in terms of how to compare the costs or the monies that are being spent in countries, these are 2013 numbers, and you can see that we're not even half of India and a third of China. Now, they probably need to spend more because they don't have the same infrastructure, but we're lagging farther and farther behind in our infrastructure. Pipelines are bursting all the time. We have 100-year-old pipes that are still being used for water conveyance throughout our country. I'm going to get to that in a little bit. Water exports. You know, it's not. We can. This could be reality. There's a company in Sitka, Alaska, that has potential for delivering, I forget how many millions of gallons of water, but $26 million a year from transporting water in big, very large crude-carrying ships where the holds have all been washed out, and they can put water into them, and they could deliver that to countries across the world. They're going to get charged about a penny a gallon. They're going to get killed on the delivery at 6 cents a gallon. But even so, there'll be people who could buy that. Or there's these giant water bags where you're towing basically a water balloon through the ocean and delivering water that way. The point with the previous slide and this slide is that there are people thinking of ways to do this, and it's not a matter of if, but probably when. And who's to say the Great Lakes aren't going to be looked at the same way? Could a big straw be put in the Great Lakes? We all say we never would allow that to happen, but it's happening other places. So to not be prepared for that situation, or at least be smart about how to address it now, is something that I think is very important. The Panama Canal, great example of water use and maybe how technology took a little too long to get implemented. But The canal uses 2 billion gallons of fresh water a day. They don't use seawater, they use fresh water. They use the water from a series of lakes at the highlands in the middle of Panama. Ships will pay, because it's so valuable to go through there, during the high season, they'll pay $400,000 to get to the front of the line to move through. Big oil tankers will do that. It's only 50 miles long. One ship uses 52 million gallons of fresh water. That fresh water then leaks either into the Atlantic or the Pacific Basin. The system is on schedule to double in the next couple of years in terms of capacity. And that's because they're building some enormous locks. The engineers were really concerned about the water needed to drive these bigger locks. And so this doesn't seem that advanced to me, but they thought about, well, let's just retain the water that's in those locks instead of dumping it out. And so now they've implemented retainment ponds to capture a majority of the water. So even though those locks are more than double the size of what was previously being used, they're using less water than previously. Still using an enormous amount, but they're just using very simple technology to help alleviate the demand. The other thing is that that's a very rain-intensive part of the world, that part of the globe. They get a lot of rain. If climate change patterns shift where that rain comes, those lakes that they draw the water from will start to drop. And so what's that going to do? And you think of economic impact. A lot of our U.S. shipping relies on that canal, and it will be felt a lot of different ways. The canal itself may open up a lot of new opportunities, larger ships coming through that can get to our eastern seaboard to deliver goods or take goods much quicker and more efficiently. But at the same time, with the Arctic route opening up, ships may just completely skip the Panama Canal and go through the Arctic Circle, because that's an opportunity now. So there's some big engineering structures that are playing a pretty big role in the commerce that they're looking at ways to better use the water, but there's also going to be some challenges depending on how things go. Back to infrastructure. So, yeah, this is out of a newspaper. Cold snap ruptured a major pipeline same year the light bulb was invented. It doesn't mean that pipe was necessarily bad until it ruptured, but logs, or not necessarily hollowed out trees, but wire-wrapped wooden conveyance pipes are still in use. I think we still have some in Traverse City. If they work, great. When they fail, people say, why did we have a wooden pipe in the ground that's 120 years old? The problem is that we don't know where things are failing. We don't do a good job at monitoring. We don't have the technology to inspect these. So even though we have a schedule of replacement of Block A versus Block B, Block A is older, therefore it's the next one in line. It may be just fine. And I think that's part that really I'd like to see changes in, is that we have the technology to be better at understanding that actually you probably aren't needed to change for 20 years. Let's focus on the areas that are most critical. 200-year backlogs in terms of the amount of infrastructure replacement needed in most major cities. And the water pricing of the delivery of the water isn't meeting the needs of what's going on. So average age is 80 years. I think the civil engineering, one of the governing bodies of civil engineers gave U.S. water infrastructure a D- grade. It's not surprising, but significant lines burst all the time. Big water spills coming out of these right in downtown, very expensive to fix. 6 to 7 billion gallons of water lost just to leaks every day. Usually that's clean water. That's the hard. We've already spent all that money to clean it, use the energy to pump it, and then we push it right back in the ground. Corrosion has been an issue, but again, current water rates in major cities push replacement schedules 200 years. By the time we hit 200 years, everything we just put in is going to be old again. So we need to start thinking of ways to better do these technologies. And there are good examples out there. There's pipe bursting technologies that don't have you dig up the road, that maybe only do areas that's needed. I think that's where we'll see some things evolve. The use of robotics, and I'll talk about that at the very end, but the use of technology and robotics to get into these very confined spaces or hard to reach or dangerous places are things that we can be better at. Here's one example. This was at that Water Innovations Alliance conference. I wrote these numbers down because I couldn't believe it. But this isn't everywhere. This is some city, somewhere, U.S. Looking at the aging infrastructure, if we have 100 raw water gallons, uncleansed water going into the system, it's going to take 33 gallons, a third of the water, for the energy that plant uses to do its job. We have the backwash and brine, about 25. Some are so poor in their leakage, 40% of the water disappears to leaks. And so you open your tap and you've only got 2% of that initial water coming out of your tap. So when we talk about, do we want to drink bottled water or use the tap, I think in this situation I'm going to maybe go get some bottled water because I think it's a better deal. But this isn't everywhere, and this isn't the norm, but it exists, and it's something that needs to be addressed. The water industry. We talk about technology changing. We got to talk about the people who run that. They're getting older. You can just see the numbers. The workforce development, the education needed to train these people to run the new types of systems has got to change. Average age is 54. That's pretty old for an industry to have an average age like that. Now, a lot of the work that was done previously isn't going to be the same work that was done now. Things are contracted out differently and so on. But we don't want to lose sight that we need a workforce that can help us be better in this area, and it's going to take a different type of training. And that's something that we really need to focus on. Here's an example of something that came out not too long ago, 3 weeks ago, but Kenya finds a 70-year supply of water. They were looking for oil and they found water. And I think that's ironic that probably someday we're going to be looking for water and find oil, because the same technology that finds the oil is what's finding the water. And so if we start searching for water where we need it most, we can use a lot of that same technology. But this is in the middle of a war-strife area. They said there's probably no one who wants to actually go in there and drill it and develop the management of it because they're worried for their own safety. But there's a 70-year supply in a region that was extremely is extremely drought-ridden. And what an opportunity. How many more types of situations are like this? And then how do we train people to best manage that supply? Because we have plenty of examples where a 70-year supply turns into a 7-year supply because people start growing rice in the middle of the desert or something like that. So now diving a little deep, whoops, this is what I was hoping didn't happen. So we're going to go below in some of the technology areas, but I put this up here to put a perspective on the Great Lakes, which are in the upper left corner. This doesn't show up real well on there, but those are the Great Lakes. There's the Edmund Fitzgerald. Not big compared to the rest of the world. And then we have all the Atlantic and the Pacific. This is obviously an animation, but it's roughly to scale in terms of depths, in terms of size. We have the Marianas Trench here, the deepest point in either of the oceans at about 35,000 feet. The Puerto Rico Trench, which is in the Atlantic's deepest point. Mauna Kea volcano in Hawaii, which is the biggest mountain if you count from its below surface base to its height, bigger than Mount Everest. But you put perspective on all this and you can see how tiny and infinitesimal the Great Lakes are. And so what does that allow people to think about what's needed in the Great Lakes? And I see this when people deal primarily in the oceans, the Great Lakes are an afterthought. And if we look at, bear with me on this, but we know more, and this was brought up in a conference just a few months ago. We have better maps. We have better resolution. We know more about all the nooks and crannies on Mars and the Moon than we do our oceans, by far. The example of where the science tracks are, this lower area down this map here with all the lines going over it, those are the primary ship tracks for research where we've collected a lot of information. You can see the majority is that we haven't collected a lot of information. We need to know more. There's a lot of opportunity for food, for medicines, for understanding how things are going to change in the ocean, that we just need baseline information. But we have plenty of information on the Moon and Mars. We explore Mars for water. We just started exploring the Earth for water now, as this Kenya example shows. budgets for NOAA versus NASA are not even comparable. I think 1,500 years of NOAA equals 1 year of NASA. So there's got to be more emphasis on the amount of money directed towards research in oceans and Great Lakes. So now we know more about the world's oceans than we do about the Great Lakes. So this was the real point here. This slide came up, and it had see how much we know about the eastern seaboard and some parts of the western and the Gulf, but really not a lot. I said, where's all your Great Lakes stuff? You must not just have it in there. Oh, no, there isn't anything on the Great Lakes. I'm like, it's the biggest portion of the world's fresh water, so to speak. And yeah, but we have data. We've collected a lot of information. Yeah, we haven't gotten to it yet. So those kind of responses are typical. The Great Lakes are a bathtub to a lot of people. You can throw stones across them. You can see the other coastline. People don't get the immenseness of our lakes. So this is something that certainly, as we develop some of the programming and our students go out into the jobs, this is what my hope is, that whether they're in the Great Lakes region or out, that they bring more awareness back of what some of the opportunities are. I think the more we become a national center for training in certain applications, the more we're going to raise awareness for what we have here. We just had a student who returned from the Atlantic Ocean. He received an internship for some of the training he had done at the college. He was selected, he was one of 9 that were chosen out of a pool of about 2,000 people. And he spent 6-7 weeks on a research vessel mapping the mid-Atlantic ridge off of Iceland. Chris was out there, he was coming back, and it was getting to be near the end of his internship, paid internship, great opportunity, helping fix equipment that the onboard technicians didn't know how to do. And Chris, I texted him, I'd gotten a call from an employer, said they needed somebody to go to Australia to help map, it was a hydroelectric dam tunnel in Australia in the Snowy River region. So I texted him because couldn't call him out there. I said, hey, you interested in going to Australia when you get back? And he just texted back a smiley face. And I said, no, I'm serious. And he's really, and that he left. He left about a week ago. Maybe it was 2 weeks ago. But he's now in Australia for the rest of the year, conducting work with a company from Auburn Hills, a job in Michigan, doing a lot of the same training that he's learned here at NMC. He's set with that company. They will hire him, I'm sure of that, because he's number one, he's a great student, but he's a good worker. And again, it puts an emphasis on what we can do with our students and what our students can do with what NMC offers. Great example for that. So back to what does it provide us? Well, we can use hydrographic information in many different ways. We can update nautical chart. We can learn about ecosystems. Certainly in the Great Lakes, we have information on how deep the water is, but we really don't know what the bottom's made up of. We don't know where our fish populations exist or don't exist. We don't know where invasives, if we identify a certain substrate that they enjoy, we don't know where those substrate areas are. We can also use it to help map gas seeps in the ocean floor. The image on the right is a group that actually helped identify and put an end to concerns that they hadn't capped the Deepwater Horizon well. They were able to use acoustics to look for bubble streams in the water column that helped them pinpoint exactly where issues were with the capping of that well. So it actually made it quicker and more efficient and more exact in terms of finding where it was. Down below that, you see a picture and a sonar image sandwiched together. That's a sheet pile wall. That could be a bridge pier abutment. That could be a harbor wall. That could be any river structure, coastline structure, anywhere in the U.S. They're failing just like the infrastructure is failing. They're old. There's no money to fix them. We need to fix them because we can have catastrophic bridge failures. Majority of the bridges in the U.S. need more research done or investigations done to make sure they stay current with their safety standards. You can do that acoustically. What we couldn't do with divers, we can do acoustically with 2 people. Divers would go underwater, often dark, murky water, and have to feel their way through. You can do that with a sonar in a fraction of the time. Still using people. We're not removing the humans from the equation. But we're getting a better answer, millimeter precision with exact positioning of where damages occur on the face of dams or on issue like this. Companies know, or municipalities know, if they need to dredge or don't need to dredge. It makes you a better manager of your money. A lot of things that are, this is the future. This is what we train for in the marine technology. And then on the lower left, that's a law enforcement uses these for body searching. So you can do quite a bit to find drowning victims using this. So this is a poster we presented to a company, Kongsberg, at a conference they hosted to really put out what they've done for us. And this is really an example of how one piece of sonar gear really led to us an opportunity to create degree pathways, student jobs, outstanding research. We've been involved in research in the national park waters, looking at avian botulism. The Park Service wants to know a lot more about what's going on in their park below the water, which I think is phenomenal, that they're investing time to understand what people don't come to see. It's what's on the bottom. So this was really a culminating effort of years of working with this company, and it just continues to evolve. It also turned into the Nat Geo show that we had called Drain the Great Lakes. And if you haven't seen it, it's on Nat Geo channel, still replays quite a bit, but it highlights the work that our students did in northern Lake Michigan, and specifically looking at the South Manitou Bay. So this depression area right here, that's where the lighthouse is on South Manitou Island, right on shore here. That's where the wreck of the Three Brothers is, the shipwreck that was exposed about 25 years ago. This is also what the Park Service and their biologists have deemed the Cladophora graveyard. It's where all the algae that has been breaking off and rotting seems to deposit, and it might be one of the areas where avian botulism gets a kickstart every fall. We're starting to see it again. But this show is phenomenal. It's all Kongsberg equipment. It's Canadian Hydrographic Survey Society and us. And they detail all the lakes and some of the really unique features, including the river channel beneath the Mackinac Bridge, the impact crater in Lake Ontario that was formed before the Great Lakes were formed. So really some impressive stuff. And again, something our students are part of. So avian botulism. I just got an email today from one of the Sleeping Bear Dunes biologists who's head of the team, starting to see the birds wash up, not in the numbers we've seen previously, but it's going to start happening, and some of these bigger wind events often start that process going. But avian botulism is something that's been around the Great Lakes for a long time. It was first associated with fertilizers and nutrients coming into the water column and then generating more algae growth. That algae growth then would rot and decompose and use up the oxygen. That created the catalyst for botulism spores, which are natural, to germinate into the bacteria, the toxin, which would be ingested by fish and by birds when they ate the fish. So it resulted in this case, dead loons washing up on the shoreline about every 10 to 20 feet in the numbers of thousands. And this was a picture from Sleeping Bear Dunes before they were named the most beautiful place in the U.S. This was 2006 or 2007. 1,700 loons died that fall. Just loons. 27,000 birds, I think, throughout the Great Lakes. Maybe more. These are confirmed kills, not even the ones we don't know about. But since 1999, 100,000 birds have died from this. We thought we had it fixed when we removed some of the issues with fertilizers and the nutrients or the chemical composition of them. But what's happened is we've had the introduction of invasive species like the quagga mussel and the zebra mussel. They've helped clear up the water by filtering the water. At the same time, their feces is the nutrient that helps the algae grow. The algae is natural, but more sunlight with fertilizer and warmer temperatures in some cases means things like to grow a little more. So we have enormous algae growth, or things that didn't used to happen in deeper waters. And so we have more decomposing algae, so we have the whole process starting up again. I don't know that they've got all the mechanisms down, but the park has really done a good job at trying to better understand what's going on. And that's where our college got involved with several years of research, both investigating those habitat areas, mapping them, trying to give them a better understanding of of where the hot spots were for the collection areas, because it's critical to know where the algae decomposes, because then you can maybe come up with a solution that's targeted. You can't do anything to the whole lake. It's just too big, and it'd be too detrimental to the other species. Okay, so the quagga replaces the zebra. I think everyone primarily still uses zebra mussels as being the primary invasive. They've heard of the quagga. A lot of our students have never even heard of the quagga mussel. Well, if you compare the zebra and the quagga left and right, you can see the zebra mussel has been petering out quite a bit. I mean, it never really took a foothold in the entire lakes, but at the same time, the quagga mussel has overrun the lakes. It's deeper, it's more aggressive, it's bigger, it filters more water. The number of quagga mussel that are in Lake Michigan, this is from Gary Fahnenstiel at the NOAA Research Lab, he said that the way they look at it, the numbers they predict and how they estimate it, we're looking at a complete filtration of Lake Michigan in the springtime every 6 to 9 days. So every drop of water is going through the belly of a mussel every 6 to 9 days. So all that stuff is being filtered out. The water is becoming clearer. We've used ROVs. I've used ROVs since the early 1990s, remotely operated subs. And we used to go down to the bottom of Lake Michigan, maybe even 100 feet, and it would be like a snowstorm, kind of like what's outside today. It'd be very hard to see. It'd be like turning your high beams on in a snowstorm or in the fog. Now, you don't have to turn your lights on at 200 feet. The sunlight still penetrates down. The water's nice and clear. And we always stress, don't confuse clear with clean, because clear does not mean clean. We'd rather have the lakes cloudy. We'd rather see the particulate in the water. We'd rather not have the sunlight light up the bottom at 200 or 300 feet underwater. So things are changing very rapidly. And the reason that this happens in the spring is that when the water warms up in the springtime, you have a constant density of about, well, water temperature at 39.4 degrees Fahrenheit is the densest water can be. So when that happens, that water either sinks and pushes up warmer or cooler water until everything gets to the same temperature. And at that same temperature, 4 degrees Celsius, the whole lake is like a conveyor belt moving up and down. So as the mussels filter out, one adult filters 1 liter a day. They're pulling another liter down, spitting out. And you can create this conveyor belt, and that's where you get the 6 to 9 day filtration. These guys are still multiplying, so those numbers could even get quicker. Water levels, big topic right now. Perspective on the amount of water in each of the Great Lakes and what 1 inch decline. So if we look at Lake Michigan, a 1 inch decline of water represents about 400 billion gallons of water. And you can see the other lakes in there. But if we go down to Lake Erie, as I mentioned, 130 trillion gallons, and the south to north transfer project is pushing 11 trillion gallons every year, when it's done. If it ever gets completed at the design capacity that they had wanted to do it, they're draining that lake every 11-ish or so years. But a 1 inch decline is a lot of water in the lakes, and it's important to understand numbers. A lot of zeros get thrown out, and I think that sometimes a billion and a million seem like both a lot, but a billion is a lot more than a million. And when we start talking trillions, we're almost getting to numbers that are hard to even fathom. So if we look at levels long term, this is the period of record from the Corps of Engineers. Starts with Lake Superior at the top, and then we have Lakes Michigan, Huron. You can see the fluctuation in Lake Michigan changes very randomly. There is no 20-year cycle or period of change that often was talked. It's quite random. But you can see Lake Michigan probably has, and Lake Huron has the most fluctuation of all the lakes. And that's because it's really the least regulated. The Lake Superior has the St. Mary's and the Soo Locks that has a lot of control on the amount of water that leaves the basin. Lake St. Clair still has some variation, but as you move down through the lakes, you see less and less. So we are at a low period. If you look at the last 15 or 20 years of Lake Michigan, we've sustained a low after a near all-time high in 1997 and an all-time high in 1986. I remember in 86, I would not want to go back to 86's water levels. I didn't like it. My parents' home was built in the 20s. or 30s, I forget, but it was far back. It was built at a setback distance that's reasonable on East Bay. And I remember how far the 86 water came up, so much far, it impacted our crawl space. I wouldn't want that back, because I've seen how we've developed since then. We'd pay a big penalty if we went back to those high waters. I remember 86 talking about it, and I studied a lot of the Lakes Michigan shoreline after the 86 highs, looking at erosion cycles, how things were changing. And no one thought the water was going to drop, and it dropped pretty quickly, as we can see from the graph. Went back to average. And then in 1997, we crept back up, and then we had this dramatic drop to what I'll call, if you look at the graph, one of the most consistent time water level records that we've ever had in Lake Michigan and Huron. The water level, even though it fluctuated within that time period, it stayed probably the most stable. If we drew a line graph through that, we would have nearly a flat line until this last February, when we saw the all-time record low, January 13. We exceeded the 64 lows by a few inches. A 6-foot, 4-inch difference from the all-time high of 86 to the all-time low of February. So, another 6 inches above me or so. That's a big difference. And the lake fluctuates between those two. If you went with what the Corps projected at that time, we were going to experience months and months and months of record lows. It wasn't going to be until June that we even started to creep above all-time record lows. And certainly, I guess I didn't put these in a good order. But since then, we've seen quite a dramatic increase. I have a slide on that, so I'm going to hold off on that right now. But to put perspective on change, let's see. Sorry about this. This is a borrowed slide from Mark Breederlin. This is what happened in the St. Clair River Channel. The St. Clair River Channel is dredged for navigation purposes. Its final navigation depth of, I believe, 27 feet was done in 1960. By 1964, we had hit the all-time low. We had continually dropped after that dredging occurred to that elevation, and we didn't know if that was going to stop. The projections were uncertain of whether or not we had opened up something that we shouldn't have done. But if you look what happened the following 3 years, every year it gained 6 to 12 inches of water. So much so that by 1967 we actually went over the long-term average. Normal precipitation during these time periods. So the lakes, there's a balance between precipitation, runoff, and evaporation. And it's very difficult to predict all of those in advance. But they can work with each other in a negative way. They can work with each other in a positive way. And I think that we saw a dramatic decrease. Was it a result of the dredging? It could have been. Could have been a lot of factors. We also saw a dramatic increase. So the lakes respond the way the lakes want to respond, and it's very difficult to predict that sometimes. I'm going to back up. So this is an image at the end of Grand Traverse Bay. To put historic lake levels into perspective, this would be an image that would have its most significance about 10,000, 11,000 years ago. This is a riverbed that joins Grand Traverse Bay to Lake Michigan. This riverbed is 110 feet underwater today. So the red is actually below water, 110 feet. You can see it's right next to the end of the Leelanau Peninsula. We've got the Norwood area heading up to Charlevoix over here. So it's in the middle of the bay where it heads out into Lake Michigan. This river is a couple miles long. This river would have connected what I'll call Grand Traverse Lake, an inland lake, to Lake Chippewa, or the low stand of Lake Michigan. This is after the glaciers retreated. This would have been an enormous amount of water flowing out of Grand Traverse Lake into Lake Chippewa. This riverbed is 300 to 400 feet wide in its widest points. It's over 80 feet deep in its deepest points below the surrounding terrain. That was a big river. That's bigger than any part of the Boardman is. That's on par with the Mississippi in a lot of places. That was an enormous amount of water. That's still here, and our students mapped that. This has long been, we've known there was a connection this way, but when the students were doing some work over in the Park Service, when they were bringing the boat around the top of the Leelanau Peninsula, I said, go ahead and see if you can find something there. And I got a text saying, oh, we found something, and can we stay all night and just continually map. It took them about a week to do this. They found a shipwreck while they were there. We've engaged in a research partnership. We put a proposal in with the University of Michigan to look at what the Alpena Amberley Ridge, which is another low water stand artifact area, to this, to try to compare what populations would have existed, what artifacts we might be able to find. There's a lot we can do here, but a lot of really high-value research that really bring us to the birth of the Great Lakes, because this is information that isn't highly understood. We don't know the low stand of the lakes. There's predictions, but they're sometimes 50 feet from the high to the low. That's pretty big for science. So our students, the one student, David, who did a final paper in his bachelor's thesis or project at Grand Valley, he came up with a number that he had an uncertainty of maybe 6 feet. And it was pretty impressive. He compared it to some other similar features that we saw when mapping over in the Sleeping Bear Dunes area, came up with a reasonable explanation, and it really fit. And we'll do more here. And there's a lot of people that are excited about doing more. So back to Lake Michigan Huron. And we're looking at what happened last year, 2012. On the right, in the upper right, we have historical averages, the St. Mary River inflow, precipitation and runoff, and then the outflows from evaporation, the Chicago Canal, and going down the St. Clair River. And on the left, we have what happened in 2012. So these are Corps of Engineers predictions. This is Keith Kompolowitz, who gave this talk. This is his slide. He will be at the Freshwater Summit next week. You'll get a lot more detail of where this is. But instead of 23 inches coming out of the St. Mary's, we had 18. Instead of 32 inches of precipitation, we had 28. We had less runoff, 6 inches less. But if you look at evaporation was 12 inches more than average. If we had had average evaporation, he suggested we would have had 12 more inches of water last February when we were at that all-time low. The St. Clair River outflow was down, and that's because the lakes were down. There wasn't as much pressure head pushing water out. The Chicago diversion is always the equivalent of 1 inch. That's a Supreme Court designated flow value. They have to hit that every year. But you can see the balance really was in favor of the outflows, and they worked together. We had low, well, at that time, we hadn't had a lot of snow. We certainly had a lot of snow after, and we had a lot of snow all the way up into April. The snowpack in the northern part of Lake Superior was phenomenal compared to the previous 10 years. The water equivalent was 10, 20 inches more than we had had previously. So a lot of things worked in the lake's favors in the months to follow. We've only seen water levels increase. All lakes, I'll go to the next slide here. All lakes are near normal. Lake Superior is about 3 inches below its long-term average. Lake St. Clair is about 2 inches below long-term average. Lake Erie is above its long-term average. Lake Ontario is above its long-term average. None of these lakes were anywhere near that when we were dealing with this before. Lake Michigan and Huron is still low. It's still low by about 18 inches below long-term average, but it's crept up from that negative, or 29 inches below long-term average. So all the lakes have gained nearly a foot of water in the last 6 to 8 months. Now the Corps, it's difficult to see, but they're projecting us to stay above the all-time lows. But if I looked at their February projection, they were suggesting that from their models, we were going to see significant lows continue at least through June. So do I believe that their prediction now is right? No, I don't know. But I'm also going to be a lot more cautious about using a projection if I were going to rely on this, because it was about as far off as it could be before. Now, I don't know why, and maybe Keith will talk about that. But these models are only as good as the inputs that can be used to help them. And I think that we don't understand key features like evaporation. We have predictions for evaporation, and there's more research going on to understand evaporation. But I don't know that we have a good handle on really characterizing how evaporation is measured in our lakes. And then lastly, I said I would end with robotics, and this is what I'm going to end with. I put this up here because NMC is operating in the arenas of both air, sea, and land in terms of robotic training. Unmanned systems and robotics, not drones used in military, but drones used in agriculture, drones used in aquaculture harvesting, water exploration on Mars. All these will play a role in making agriculture, a lot of things we do, but agriculture is where we think we're going to see the biggest boom. Thousands and thousands of new jobs will be out there because we'll be able to monitor water management, fertilizer, and pesticide applications at extremely precise levels. We'll only use what we absolutely have to use, if anything. We'll understand if we're growing crops in a field, and typically it was always corn in rows. Well, why does it have to be corn in rows? Why couldn't it be corn here, a sunflower here, and a soybean here? The robot can go in and measure the soil nutrients and put the right crop in there, give it the right fertilizer, know exactly where it is with a GPS, come back when it's supposed to be ready, check it, harvest it, and it knows the soybeans right next to it. This is where we're headed. This is not science fiction anymore. It's already happening. But what an application. The farmer is still going to have to be the farmer. It doesn't replace him. But we don't need farmers and tractors driving linear lines night and day. They could be doing a lot more to develop their crops. Same thing with water exploration. There's a lot of places that we can't get to or we don't have access to in a consistent manner. Mars being one of them, but I think there's a few on Earth that we have yet to look at. The harvester I mentioned, and then aquaculture. The idea that a lot of the corals and a lot of the sponges that we see in the bottom of the ocean have some real high-value medicinal opportunities for developing new drugs, and even for harvesting algae for fuel. There's new research in algae-based biofuel. Algae is great because we've got a lot of it. It's very renewable. It grows very quickly. If we can find the right algae in the right environment, we can start creating a biofuel from algae. The college was part of a research operation last summer where we were testing biofuel on the state of Michigan, the big ship. And the reason they were doing it is because the military needed more information about the acoustics of a ship running on biofuel versus regular diesel because they didn't have a lot of information. So they loaded the ship with $300,000 of $50 per gallon algae fuel. So it's really expensive. I'm not using it yet. But that price will come down. Biofuel from soy is about $5 a gallon. So algae's got a long ways to go, but if it does, we can grow algae very quickly. It's very renewable, it's very sustainable. We could come up with a new fuel source. So aquaculture, harvester, exploring deep, using things where we can't put people anymore, there's a lot of opportunities. And that's where I'm going to end, and I'd be happy to take questions from anybody in the audience. I think it.
Now it is. Now it's on. No.
Let's see if it's on. It is on? Oh, it is. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Wait a minute, Jimmy. Well, we're recording. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You have a question?
Yeah. Okay. Hans, I haven't heard the energy balance, and I'm sure that you have done it, but it seems to me like a lot of energy goes into our ice formation. I haven't seen any of the growth and the depth and the ice cover.
Yeah.
It seems like that would answer quite a few of these questions that most people might have. Is that anticipated in some of your sampling?
The ice meaning the formation or which?
Well, whatever you do with the energy balance, but I would think not the ice cover only, but the ice depth too would be a factor.
Oh yeah. I think all those things. Water temperature at depth. I mean, we're good at measuring it at the surface, but we don't know what it is 10 feet, 100 feet, 150 feet below. We need that to help predict better ice coverage or what's going to happen, because it's that slug of warm water that really drives whether we're going to see any ice or not. The other issues we're playing with, there's warming in the climate. There's also, I think, more sunlight energy going into the water just because it's clear, so it's penetrating farther. So we're seeing issues with that. But yeah, ice plays a big role, but we need more baseline information to even understand how the water column is being affected. I think if we had more buoys out and we had more ice, if we start getting ice in areas where we haven't had it and understanding how it's adapting or changing to climate, that'll be valuable. We haven't seen the ice cover in the last few years, at least locally we haven't. So I don't know if I'm answering your question completely, but I think there's a lot we need to understand along with ice. Is that?
Well, I don't have the mic, but it seems like the satellite.
Oh, sure, yeah. And the question was regarding whether the information from ice coverage and satellites, and they do predict and do have some good passes, but unfortunately they're always cloud dependent. We can't get good images because I used to use satellites to show how ice coverage changed very quickly from a completely open lake to a skim ice to a hard pack ice, but then the clouds would come in and we'd miss some information. So yeah, there's a lot more remote sensing that can occur. My major professor in school, Guy Meadows, is the director of the Great Lakes Research Lab at Michigan Tech. I know he's going to do a lot of good work up there because Lake Superior represents a great opportunity for us to do a better job in understanding a lake that isn't quite as influenced as the lower lakes are. So,
Hans, we have a question here.
yeah.
I have two questions. Would you repeat what you said about the number of shorebirds that have been poisoned by the botulism over what time span? Did you say 27,000? Is that?
One year there were 27,000 birds that were confirmed killed from type E avian botulism throughout the Great Lakes, yes.
That's throughout the Great Lakes, not the Sleeping Bear area.
Not just Sleeping Bear. In 2006 or 2007, in Sleeping Bear, we had 1,700 loons,
Right.
and cormorant and merganser, and a lot of the birds that some people don't care about, ring-billed gulls and things. But yeah, the numbers are a lot. They're extremely large. So.
Yes, this is slightly off the subject, but not really. Is there a way that you can, how can you judge the nutrient value of agricultural crops depending on how they're raised? Aquaculture and would you compare them perhaps to organic farming, which doesn't use chemical fertilizers as much as agribusiness?
Yeah, you could do all of those, and I think the nutrient content is something you just measure in a lab in terms of what you find in the final product. But some of the issues with these newer technologies is they don't look right, and I'm not going to eat a salad that doesn't look like salad. I mean, we've heard these things, so they don't feel like salad. It's not crispy. So who wants a salad that isn't crispy? So they're working on those kind of things to help. What are the agriculture or plant life survives because of all the stresses that are on it. So the more the wind blows and the more that things get trampled, the stronger they are. And so in a sterile environment, you don't have any of those stressors. So how do we add wind? How do we shake it? How do we do things to make it? Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. So, yeah, it is. It's just we'll see where it goes.
Another question here.
Okay. Your information on the quagga mussel was brand new to me tonight. I'm familiar with the zebra mussel and the fact that the federal government had passed laws on the tankers so that they wouldn't dispose of the water. The graphic showing the extent of the quagga mussel was serious.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk about a little bit more about control programs that maybe are necessary.
I'll start with I've spent a lot of time underwater with subs, and I've never been a place where I haven't seen a quagga, any depth. Inside the hold of ships that are relatively sealed off, they're growing everywhere. But they were brought in at the same time. It just took them longer to adapt to our ecosystem. But they were the mechanism that really choked out the zebra mussel. Just like the zebra mussel got on our native clams and choked them out, the quagga got on the zebra mussel and choked them out, I think, is a lot of it. They're hardier, colder water, deeper water, whereas the zebra had a limitation with depth. Are they going to follow the same fate, though, as the zebra? Did the zebra die out because of just not finding the food that they were interested in anymore? Is it a cycle? We hope it is. I don't know. The control methods for something like that that's basically everywhere is very difficult without disrupting something else. And we're very focused on the Asian carp right now, which is, we need to be. I don't disagree, but that's not here. We've got things that have been here a long time, and just thinking acoustically, we used to be able to map the bottom and be able to tell substrate so much better, but now there's all these dead shells on the bottom, and they're all like little radar horns. And so now the bottom is so reflective, we don't get any information using certain types of sonars that we used to be able to do. And that doesn't have an effect necessarily in the environment, but it helps us in our understanding of effects to the environment. So I don't know if there's to answer directly, I don't know that they have a plan intact that would really address the magnitude that's out there. Not that they're not working on it, but I'm not familiar with the research yet. Sure.
Hans, the woman in the red sweater has a question for you.
Who's going to hold it?
I understand that the city of Chicago and the cities around it get their water from Lake Michigan, and all the Evanston and other similar cities have to send their wastewater to Chicago for treatment, and it is then sent down the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico.
Right.
Why?
Well, I wish Jim was still here.
I mean, is it purely political, or is it?
Back when the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal was first, Chicago used to spill or push out its effluent, its discharged effluent into Lake Michigan. It wasn't treated to the level it needed to be. It created issues of typhoid sickness. And so rather than just working on doing a better job at cleaning the effluent, they could create a diversion where the effluent water was no longer put into Lake Michigan but sent down the Mississippi. And they've since, that Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal, which is for barge traffic, it's where that stuff originates from. We talk about the barriers for the Asian carp and those electric barriers to keep them out. Well, prior to 1970 and the Clean Water Act, that was such a toxic soup from all that stuff coming out, no fish was going to swim up through that crap because they wouldn't survive. And so Chicago and the Clean Water Act around 1970, things changed dramatically, so they couldn't discharge the way they did. But the first thing was done to keep people from getting sick, because they drew their drinking water from the same water they discharged. No different than Traverse City did a long time ago. Right downtown in, say, Clinch Park area, we discharged our effluent from our wastewater treatment, and when people got sick, the engineer said, well, just draw the clean water a little deeper. And so we keep this barrier of just depth. Well, now we've separated them by 2 bays and I'll say a 50-mile journey. We have the most advanced wastewater treatment plant in North America. We had the first of its kind. We put out drinking water into the bay. We probably put cleaner water into the bay than we extract. So that's a great testament what this community did. That took a lot of money and a lot of support. But it's I'll say a landmark opportunity for us to showcase what we've done, how much we care, because that was not cheap. Chicago, it's a giant infrastructure, and so how do we shut the canal down to keep carp out? That's a big question that's going to be raised at the summit. What are going to be the steps to do that? And I don't know if Jim's going to specifically talk about the impacts of shutting the canal on the Chicago community as a whole, but there are some serious issues if you were to do that. I think Lower Wacker Drive would be underwater is what I heard once. And I don't know if that's true or not, but things like that where there's a trade-off to that decision.
More questions? You're closer. And this probably should be our last one. It's 6:58.
I have a question concerning the water use in fracking. There's an awful lot of water. We need more water than we need more oil, really. I mean, we have to have water to survive. Is there any way that water could be cleaned up and reused, or what can you do with that water?
Yeah,
How about charging frackers for it?
well, there could be that, but there's also the exactly, you hit it. How could we reuse it? How could we clean it? I mean, that's where I see the technology playing a role in addressing that issue. We could charge people a premium for it, but if we did something that made it back to what it was when they used it, that would be fantastic. And I think the technology for mass volumes of cleaning is happening, it's coming, and it'll hit that industry. In terms of what's going on in our region and some of the deeper fracking areas in northern Lake Michigan, we had Keith Schneider come to class during the beginning of the year. Keith, he's from Circle of Blue, and he studies that extensively. And some of the students asked, and he said, he goes, economically, it's not going to sustain. It's so expensive to go that deep when all we have to do is go to Ohio and go to much shallower well drilling to get the same product at a fraction of the cost, that the price competition will drive that out. But whether that happens or not, I don't know. But I agree, there's opportunity for filtration on these things to make it better. And eventually regulations will be implemented that will help provide better oversight.
Hans, we'd like to thank you for a terrific presentation. Can we give him another round of applause? Thank you so much. I learned a lot this evening.
Thanks.
We do have an evaluation for those of you who have one in front of you. We really appreciate you taking a few minutes to fill that out, and you can leave it on the back table when you leave. So thank you very much for coming this evening. We really appreciate it. And Hans, thanks again.
Oh, you're welcome.
We're looking forward to that Freshwater Summit November
Yeah.
1st. If you haven't signed up, you can do that online.
Right.